Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart and I've just finished painting some of these lovely new Rat Ogres from the Age of Sigmar Skaventide starter set. As you can see, I've popped them on square bases for Warhammer the Old World, but hopefully this tutorial will suit you regardless of what size base you want to put them on. Fully assembled black prime, and they're on some bases that I 3D printed as sort of a town style base for a project to do with Gotrek and Felix and Skaven Slayer and Warhammer Quest, but that's for another video. So I'm using Barbarian Brawn, Dwarven Skin, Elven Skin and Argonaut Skin, Kronos Flesh and Ares Flesh. These are two triads from Duncan Rose's Two Thin Coats range. Now, the reason I'm going to be using both because I want to work on two different types of skin tone, some with a pinkish tone to it, some with a more brownish tone, and I'll sort of explain that as I go through the process. Starting with the Barbarian Brawn, which is that more pinkish tone of the triads, the lowest colour, and focusing around the head, the hands and the feet with the airbrush, slowly building it up, allowing a little bit of the shadow from the black prime to show through. And straight away I switch to Argonaut Skin, which is the base layer of the other triad, the other browner, more sort of duller tone. And I'm using this to fill in the other skin areas, so on the arms, on most of the body, on the legs and things as well. Now we have Kronos Flesh and Ares Flesh, the mid-tone and the highlight from that second triad, and just continuing on the main body of the Rat Ogre. So showing a little bit of the previous layer each time, just gently building up with the airbrush, allowing a little bit of the shadow in the musculature. We're going to glaze back down and add lots of washes and things later on, but I just wanted that sort of two-tone effect of the slightly pinker skin around the hands and the face, and this sort of more plainer, browner skin for the rest. And then moving back to the other triad, and we have Dwarven Skin and the Elven Skin. These again are the mid and highlight tones going over that Barbarian Brawn that we placed on the feet, the hands and the head. Very much top down here. I want to leave some of that Barbarian Brawn underneath, catching the top almost Zenithal style and allowing the airbrush to do a lot of work for you. Now for a dry brush layer, just the same as I would in many ways when I do a Zenithal Prime underpainting layer with the airbrush, and then do a little bit of a dry brush to pick out the detail. Because the miniature is so light, we've gone in with the skin layers first. We can also paint in a similar kind of method. So I'm going back and working over the detail of the ropes and all of the patches of fur that are on the Rat Ogre. I'm using some new dry brushes I've recently been sent by a new company called Knott's Hobbies. There's a texture board there as well. You get soap, you get a sponge and things, and I'll do a full proper review of that in a later video in the next couple of weeks or so, but I will pop a link in the video description if you are interested in checking out their products. The link also has a bit of a discount code for viewers on the channel as well, but enough about them for now. But back to what I'm doing this very light dry brush, really just picking out the details so that when I apply some glazed layers using contrast paints, it will really help show the different sort of stages and leave a little bit of highlighting that is natural before I go on and do the rest of the base coats. Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Baron of Dice, premium wargaming dice. Over 500 styles, over 4,000 customer reviews. Welcome to the best dice on the planet. Please do check out the channel's sponsor using the link in the description below. They have a fantastic range of different dice to suit all of your faction needs, and if you use the code Miniature Realms at checkout, you get a 5% discount. So now that dry brush stage is over, I'm turning to Contrast Blood Angels Red, and this is where we're making use of the almost slap chop-esque underpainting. So while we're not over a white or a grayscale, the flesh colours are absolutely light enough, and that dry brush has really picked out some of that detail. Now I will come back and highlight in a very traditional method afterwards, but I do like to get my base coats down like this where I can, because it makes that highlight a lot easier. You can follow the lines that are on there, almost colour them in, and in some cases you can leave parts and not do any extra highlights at all, and it still looks fantastic. Next up we have contrast warp lightning, and we give it the same treatment as we place it over the bit of warpstone that's embedded in the shoulder of the rat ogre. Because we've already dry brushed there and caught those edges, they show through, and not only does it look pretty cool as it is, if you wanted to leave it like that you could, it also helps you highlight afterwards. Now for contrast Cygor brown, and I'm going to use that to base coat all of the fur areas. Now I'm going for more of a classic look here rather than the new Skaventide look, whereas they have fur areas, then a sort of grey area which is like where the fur has worn away, and then some kind of naked flesh areas as well. It's almost like it's wearing a fur suit over its naked flesh. I'm going for more of the look of the fur patches and skin patches, just because I prefer that look for the more Warhammer fantasy-esque style. Now for some contrast skeleton horde. We don't need much of this, but I'm just painting in over the rope strapping that's holding on that little metal plate across his head, and also picking out some of the bones that are on these scenic bases that I've 3D printed. More contrast, and this is Garagak sewer, and I'm going to be using that on the leather areas, which is next to nothing. It's literally just the belts on these chaps. Now contrast Gorgrunter fur, just for a different tone of brown to stand out from the fur, and that will do for this sort of wooden large belt buckle. Contrast Black Legion is perfect for all the big talon nails, not forgetting the big fingernails as well. Contrast Agoras Dunes has got a slightly stronger yellow tone than the skeleton horde, so I'm using this on the teeth. Before we step away from contrast and use Two Thin Coat's Yellow Flame, and I'm just painting in the whole eyeballs yellow. For the start of the metallics we have Scale Colour Decayed Metal from their Metal and Alchemy range, and it just gives them a really nice brown decayed look, it's in the name, to all of the metals, and you think they would be pretty decayed and old and rusty. So Two Thin Coats again, and this is Platinum Crown, which is a kind of brownish metal, and I'm just stippling it on here. Funnily enough, using another product from Knott's Hobbies. This is a sponge holder and one of their sponges, and it's quite a dense sponge, and it's really useful for doing this kind of thick stippling layer. It's an alternative to a heavy dry brush or an overbrush here. Really quite like it. You can use the same holder with any foam, so if you wanted to do more of a subtle chipping effect, you could use the kind of foam you find in your blister pack, so I'm sure I'll be using it for both. Again, you can get this via the link in the video description. Now for some Game Air Silver, I'm going to carry on with that sponging just a little bit towards the tops and the edges, partly for highlight, but partly to show where the metal would have been shiny from scraping against things. Back to some more Two Thin Coats, and we have Berserker Red, Sanguine Scarlet and Demon Red, part of one of their red triads, and I just work in my highlights over the Blood Angels red contrast that we've already started. Now the base colour here I've not used. I popped some on my palette just in case I need to reinforce any shadows, but I'm essentially going in here with the mid-tone and then the highlight. Very much traditional line highlighting here, blending out a little bit with water at times and then going in with the top highlight. Two Thin Coats again, and we have Ethereal Green and Trooper White, both on the wet palette, and the idea is to highlight the edges of this warpstone. So the Ethereal Green to start with on its own, then a 50-50 mix with the Trooper White, before moving on to some small dots in the corners with the white on its own. This is a really mixed oil wash from the Soilworks range from Scale Colour, and this is Grease. It's a sepia tone, maybe a little bit more brown mixed into that. Definitely a good alternative to something like Agrag's Earthshade. I'm only using it on the metallic areas here. It will dry super matte, but you've also got a lot of extra time to play around with it if you wish to. You can take it back off with Artist White Spirit. You do want to use an old brush because it will knacker your brushes, but it's really fantastic, and as it dries it will look really dirty and weathered, which is just the look we need with these Rat Ogres. Now for some Vallejo model colour, and we have Hull Red and Saddle Brown. I'm going to be highlighting all of the fur with this. It's just take a little while. So it's Hull Red first, and we're just doing these little lines all over the raised bits of fur detail. Then afterwards we go back and add a little bit of the Saddle Brown, leaving a little bit of both of the previous two layers there. It has helped that we've gone over a dry brushed fur area, so that base layer of Cygor Brown does already look like it's slightly highlighted because of that, so you have got some nice lines to follow in, and it does help if you miss a little bit or you just want to be a little bit subtle, but this does take a little bit of time. Staying with model colour, we have Iraqi Sand and White Grey. I'm going to be using this just to add some highlights to the teeth. So the Iraqi Sand first, again leaving some of that darker tone, which is Agarash Dunes at the tops of the bases of the teeth near the gums, and then going in afterwards with a little bit of that white grey just to really make it pop on the ends. At the same time, I'm using the same mix and method to go back and highlight the bones on the scenic bases. And it's model colour again, and we have Flat Earth and Tan Earth, and those are the two colours I'm using to highlight over the Garagax sewer. So just along the edges of the leather belts here, both top and bottom. And then afterwards I will go back with the Tan Earth and just do a few little marks. So rather than a solid line, I've decided to go in and just put lots of little dotted lines all the way we go, and it just looks like that leather's slightly worn. Now a little bit of light brown for model colour. It's almost got an orangish tone in it, and it's a really nice highlight for those little bits of wood we did around their belts. Going back to the Blood Angels Red now, and I've got this on my wet palette and I've thinned it 50-50 with water. I'm just painting that over those yellow eyes, and what happens is it seeps in around the edges, but it just shows a little red dot pointing through. You can go back and reinforce that with a little yellow pupil if you want, but tend to show out quite nicely by themselves, and it's definitely an easier way of doing it rather than starting with red and then going in and giving it a yellow dot. And then one of my favourite methods at the moment, the Vallejo Express Colour Deep Purple and Gloomy Violet. We start off with the Gloomy Violet, and I'm going into all the recesses on the skin here, and it's very subtle, just glazing it in. This is used neat, it's quite a thin, low in pigment colour. I'm just gently painting it in around where there will be a little bit of shadow, so close to the lines in the fur, underneath the sort of the shadows in the ears, that kind of thing. You can see how subtle it is here, but there is a difference just putting it into the musculature around the top of the hand there as it meets the fur, and you do get a sort of gentle fade from top to bottom, and just letting it go into the detail, and then using a clean brush just feathering it out so you don't get any tide marks. Then after that we move on to the deep purple, and this is much stronger in pigment, so I've thinned it almost 50-50 with water on my wet palette. I'm pretty much following the same lines, but here I also go on the flat as well, so I'm going on the edges of the elbow and then go back in with a bit of water on my brush and blend it out again so I don't get any really strong staining, and really just adding loads and loads of multi-layer tones to the skin. Go around the boils and things a little bit with it as well. You can just see that flattish kind of plain looking skin is getting much more depth by adding these glaze layers. I really love doing this stage. You can really see the miniature come together when you add that extra depth. You can see here I'm just running around the cracks in the skin as it's been split by adding that bit of warpstone there. And again I go back with a clean brush afterwards and just sort of feather out anything that looks a little bit too strong, blend it out, and it really starts to look pretty cool. Also works really well where you've got the metal plates sort of embedded into the skin. Those areas of skin are going to be aggravated and a bit raw and sore, and it just really builds up some depth to that flesh tone. A bit of model colour again, and this is Deck Tan, and I'm just painting in all of these stitches. You could go with a nice black stitch or something here as well, but I've decided to use white, and it just pops a little bit more, and because it pops it makes the red and the purple stand out in the skin tones to really sort of balance it all. Now we're back to the Ares flesh and the Elven skin. So those are the two top highlights from each of the two triads that we started with the flesh tones. And I'm using very thinned paint here. I don't want thick brush marks here, and I'm almost glazing in, but just on the top highlights of each of the areas of musculature, making sure that where my glazes of the gloomy violet and the deep purple have run a little bit too far, or there is any tide marks showing, that I'm just blending and softening the back out again. Towards the hands and the feet I'm using more elven skin, also on the tail as well, but again still pretty thin paint, but I'm just making sure that I'm picking out where the light would hit on the top of the detail, when you can see the ligaments under the skin or the tops of the knuckles, that kind of thing. It's also worth picking out the tops of the eyebrows and the tops of the ears, and really making that skin pop, maybe along the tops of a scar or cut or something like that, and of course the knuckles on the hands as well. And here I'm just using a little bit of the same warp lightning on my wet palette, thinned with water, just to build up a little bit of very, very subtle OSL here, just where the warp stone would sort of add a little bit of glow to the skin around it. This is a rust effect from Dirty Down. It's water soluble, but you do want to be using an old brush, and you can build it up by layers and get quite different effects from it. So here, first of all, I'm just applying a thin layer, almost stippling it on. You can add a bit of water to blend it out as well. And once that's just sort of surface dry, I go back in with a little bit more and slowly stipple it. If you have a little bit in the lid as well, it's often a little bit thicker and stickier. It really helps with that stippling effect. I'm using it on most of the metal areas here that they're not well looked after. I think it really adds to the effect if it looks pretty rusty and corrosive. And this is one of the other Rat Ogres in the little unit of 3, and just because this is a slightly larger armor panel, I thought I'd demonstrate how it looks on there as well. Now for the trusty technical paint, Blood for the Blood God, and I love this stuff. Now this is on my wet palette, again thinned 50-50 with water at the moment, and I'm glazing it over all of these boils that I picked out with the yellow earlier on. And what happens is it runs around the edges of those boils and really makes the skin around it look sore and livid and makes them look pretty gross. And it's as simple as those little dots of yellow paint and this Blood for the Blood God slightly thinned over the top. And then with a little bit less dilution, you can just paint it into any scars and cuts and things as well, really to add extra redness to it. And of course, it's always fun to add it to the ends of weapons and things as well. And there we have one new Skaventide ogre on a square base, and I've had loads of fun painting him. I think he looks pretty cool. And so do his friends. I think they're going to look pretty good lining up in a Skaven army for Warhammer the Old World.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and just before I show you all the final finished pictures of my little unit of Rat Ogres, if you have enjoyed the video, please do give it a like, drop a comment below, maybe share it, subscribe to the channel and all of that kind of stuff. I do also have a Patreon as well, and thank you to all my existing patrons. You really help keep the lights on, so to speak. The support really enables me to afford to spend the time on doing videos like this. If you're not already a patron, there is a link in the video description below. Have a little look at the different tier levels. Maybe there's something that suits you. Anyway, to the pictures.
And as I've already said, I really had loads of fun painting these miniatures. When I first saw them, I liked them straight away. I was concerned that maybe they would be a lot bigger than the old Rat Ogre miniatures, but as you can see on the 50mm bases, they fit on really well and won't look out of place at all in a Warhammer fantasy or old world Skaven army. But regardless of the base size, the tips and tricks and things that I used in this video could be used for either Age of Sigmar or Warhammer the Old World. It really doesn't matter what size base they're on. So hopefully we have players of both games that are able to get something from these. Let me know what you think of the paint job and the methods used. I do like to try and save time on my paint jobs. I'm very much an army painter in the methods that I display on the channel. I'm a commission painter by day job, so I'm very used to trying to make miniatures look cool but also get through them at a reasonable time, and doing things like those skin layers with the airbrush and almost using that as an underpaint as well was a way of saving time. But I don't think it really detracts from the overall paint job. Again, they're not designed to be Golden Demon winning, but they are supposed to be eye-catching, the kind of paint job that maybe will get you a nomination at an army event or something like that, or at least be noticed or win with the chance of an army best painted. But as I said, it's not going to win you prizes for individual paint jobs. But that's the kind of method I go for, and hopefully that's useful for you guys watching this and show you some of the trips and techniques and things I use to get quite eye-catching miniatures. But if you look really closely, you can see they are army painted rather than display. Now I plan to continue chipping away at bits from the Skaventide box set. Not only am I using this summer to slowly work on a Skaven army for Warhammer the Old World, I'm also working towards a project for Skaven Slayer, Gotrek and Felix and Warhammer Quest all rolled into one. So these miniatures all have two jobs really, and you'll have to watch out on my channel and on Jordan Sorcery's channel for more news on that. Some of you will have heard me talk about it before, but we do have plans to do some games of Warhammer Quest and a whole campaign using some of the new miniatures, Gottrick and Felix, and turning it into Warhammer Quest, and I can't wait. It's going to be loads of fun. So as I leave you with this little teaser, thank you very much for watching, take care, and I'll catch you soon.